Morning glory, evening grace, brother and sisters. Good to have everybody back along with us here with our Temperance Awakening. And so look forward to doing our next alcohol lecture. And today, looking at something very important, looking at binge drinking among teenagers. And so we're going to get right into this here. And there are different definitions about what exactly binge drinking could be, but a good definition, though, would be the one given to us by the National Household Survey on Drug Abuse, which defines binge drinking as consuming 5 or more drinks on the same occasion on at least one day in the past 30 days. So, excuse me, by occasion is meant at the same time or within a couple of hours of each other. So to the National Household Survey on Drug Abuse, or NHSDA for short, a drink is a 1.5 ounce shot of 80 proof liquor, a 12 ounce bottle of regular beer, or a 5 ounce glass of wine. So now getting into a little bit more detail about what is binge drinking. Alcohol can intoxicate some people after only 1 or 2 drinks. Really anybody, but especially young people who never really had any alcohol before. You know, they might start to feel intoxicated after just having 1 drink. And so, you know, and even for like some grown people who might only drink on special occasions, you know, like once every 2 or 3 months, you know, they also, you know, could get a bit tipsy after just a couple of drinks as well. Then other people are going to find it harder to get drunk, you know, and, might wonder why they have to work at getting drunk. And so then, does anybody, though, really try to get drunk? According to data compiled in 2002 by Monitoring the Future, a project of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, most teenagers don't try to get drunk. Here, just talking about teenagers. Only 4 out of 5 have not, you know, been drunk recently. Although there are more than 40% of high school kids that have been drunk at least once, although they usually don't repeat the experience. Unfortunately, though, some teenagers do make an effort to get drunk, and they do it time after time. And those people are binge drinkers. They have frequent episodes of drinking too much, and this is the most widespread form of alcohol abuse among young Americans. According to the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System, some 30% of high school students in 2001 reported binge drinking in the previous month. So it can be an issue, you know, in different parts of the country and at different times. And some kids might binge once, suffer harmful, or, you know, maybe have disastrous consequences, you know, get in trouble with their parents, with the police, and then never do it again. While some other teenagers, though, who are usually a bit older, like, you know, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, they can manage to have 4 or 5 drinks once in a while without causing serious harm to themselves or others, and without becoming alcohol dependent. Some people would call them binge drinkers, other people would not. But the experts all agree, though, that far too many teenagers in America have a serious problem with binge drinking. Thousands of kids are binging, and they're putting their lives and certainly their futures at risk. Like the Harvard School of Public Health limits the term binge drinker to those who have had 5 or more drinks on one occasion in the past 2 weeks rather than 30 days. And they use the 5-drink cutoff point for men, but lower it to 4 drinks for women, since, as we've said before, women are more likely to become intoxicated and suffer physical harm with less alcohol intake than men. And using different standards makes it difficult to compare the results of different surveys. Like the Higher Education Center for Alcohol and Other Drug Prevention, an agency of the U.S. Department of Education, deals with the very real problem, though, of alcohol abuse on college campuses. In 2000, the center said that 5 drinks should not always be considered a binge. A better definition, it said, would take into account the drinker's body weight, as well as how fast he or she drinks and how much food he or she eats while drinking, because your body size and how much food you've had, that can certainly affect what alcohol does to your body. And all of these factors change the impact of alcohol on the body and the brain. Like college officials, the center said, found that students were dismissing messages against alcohol abuse since they believed the definitions were unrealistic. You know, however somebody wants, though, to define that term, all of these agencies find it useful to distinguish binge drinkers from heavy drinkers and alcoholics. Bingers do not necessarily progress to heavy drinking, usually defined as binging several times a month, and they may never feel the physical or emotional cravings that dominate the lives of alcoholics. Teenage drinkers should not take too much comfort in this distinction, though. Anybody who deliberately drinks to the point of intoxication, even on just occasional basis, are engaging in binge drinking with all of its risks. It's especially worrisome if that person tends to do so again in the future, if they say, hey, I'm planning to binge drink again eventually sometime in the future. But sometimes binging is obvious. Teenagers often tell therapists and counselors about drinking games in which one individual pours alcohol into another person's mouth directly from a bottle or through a funnel, and the teenagers take turns drinking directly from a beer keg. Or, they swallow what they call Jell-O shots. And these are obvious examples of binge drinking. But binge drinking, though, also occurs when a few young friends get into the habit of gathering, to watch a ball game or something, and they just drink one light beer after another until some or all of them are drunk. And of course, anybody who blacks out during drinking and cannot remember later some or all of what happened is binging dangerously. And so now I'm going to look at how common is binging. How common is binge drinking? Well, experts, once again, they don't all agree on a definition, so any numbers can be considered estimates. But the best estimates, though, issued by government agencies offer both good news and bad news. The good news is that teenagers' binging has declined recently, and it's declined even more as compared with 20 years ago. Actually even going back further than that, like 40 years ago, it's gone down. The bad news is that binging is still a major problem. Monitoring the Future has some of the best data for binge drinking, which they also call heavy episodic drinking, in which they define as 5 drinks or more in the past 2 weeks. They report that the practice had declined among 12th graders from 41% in 1983 and then to 28% in 1992. Then it rose a little bit in the 1990s, and then it began to decline again and fell to 28.6% in 2002. In addition, more 12th graders today seem to understand the risk involved in binging. In 1982, 36% believed that drinking heavily once or twice each weekend carried a great risk. The number rose to 49% in 1992. In 2002, 42% believed so, as did more than half of 8th and 10th graders. Among 8th graders, 12.4% engaged in binge drinking in 2002, marking the third year of decline from a 15.2% high in 1999. For 10th graders, the figures were 22.4% in 2002, compared with 25.6% in 1999. For both grades, however, only slightly fewer kids had engaged in heavy episodic drinking in 2002 than 10 years before. And monitoring the Future reported figures for binge drinking among various subgroups within the grades. In 2002, for 8th graders, the gender breakdown was 13.7% for boys and 12.4% for girls, so not a big difference there in the genders. The racial breakdown was 17.6% for Hispanic Americans, 9% for African Americans, 13% for Caucasians. Only 11.2% of those who planned to complete 4 years of college binged, as compared with 29.6% of the others. And the greatest contrasts involve the parents' education level. This is also very similar, like with tobacco use, whenever we went over that with the demographics. 21% of the 8th graders whose parents did not complete high school binge, while only 8.1% of those whose parents attended graduate school. For 10th and 12th graders, the gender and racial breakdowns were similar, but the effect of parents' education and kids' college plans became much less important. For Americans as a whole, binge drinking seems to peak at the age of 21, which would make a lot of sense, since that's the legal age when somebody can go and buy alcohol themselves. And then that does decline as they get older. Like when you get 22, 23, it goes down and goes down. So this suggests that the majority of people who binge as kids do outgrow the experience. Unfortunately, some get stuck along the way with very serious consequences. And speaking of that, I'm going to look at the risk of binge drinking. The American Psychological Association reported in 2001 that according to the latest evidence, heavy drinking by teenagers might do more damage to their nervous systems than they had thought. According to these studies, the human brain continues to develop until the age of 21, and as a result, teenagers who binge drink may damage to their memory and learning abilities by severely hampering the development of the hippocampus. This small but important part of the brain has a major role in storing memories and regulating motivation. Of course, most of the behavioral risks that pertain to alcohol abuse apply to binge drinking. Binge drinking, bingers are responsible for a large proportion of drinking while intoxicated motor vehicle accidents involving teenagers. And the more frequent and intense the binges, the more drinkers are likely to engage in risky sex, injure themselves, and be victims of violent crimes. The outward physical effects of binging, such as extreme intoxicating or passing out in public, also ensure that teenage bingers have a good chance of getting in trouble with the law. Binge drinking can also sometimes lead to alcohol dependency. It's not true, as some people mistakenly believe, that you can't become an alcoholic if you drink only on weekends, because several studies have found that high school binge drinkers are very likely to binge drink in college as well, according to a 1995 report from the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. And this type of behavior pattern, which lasts for several years, can become very hard to break. And even though high school and college bingers often do not believe they're problem drinkers, many of them do end up becoming alcoholics, as grown adults. And now looking at the second-hand effects of binging. Teenagers are notorious for thinking that they're just immortal, that nothing bad can happen, but even when they fully understand the dangers of risky behavior, they sometimes find it hard to believe that it could happen to me. And so if you're a person that does binge, then you need to consider the real risk of binging, because you can also harm yourself, harm other people. And innocent bystanders who do not voluntarily assume the risk often become the victims. Like motor vehicle accidents, do the most damage, but binge drinking impacts other secondhand victims as well. Like a report released in 1998 by the College Alcohol Study of the Harvard School of Public Health stated that 4 out of 5 on-campus students who are not binge drinkers had experienced at least one secondhand effect of binging. That included assault, unwanted sexual advances, property damage, and having trouble sleeping, and then having their study disturbed. So despite the attempt to educate people about the dangers of binging, it's still a big problem in North America, the United States, and Canada, and Mexico. And people need to learn the facts in order to make the intelligent choice when the situation arises. And so that's all we have today about binge drinking, particularly among teenagers. And we'll be looking at something also very important next time. We'll be looking at some of the health aspects of alcohol, particularly going to be looking at birth defects. Going to be looking at birth defects in alcohol. So come back and be with us in the next lecture, and it was great to have you here with us today, and we'll see you next time. Until the daybreak and the shadows flee away, I am Dr. Cooper, and I love you, and I appreciate you.